Hello everyone, today our group will talk about criminal justice injustice. So, what is criminal justice injustice? It is the policing and prosecution with injustices such as racial disparities, excessively harsh sentencing, and immigration policies that improperly emphasize criminalization. And what do we know about criminal justice system? We know that it is the attempt to serve and protect. It is also a source of victimization through poor discretion, lack of resources, and inefficiency by those who serve to protect and serve. Who is involved with these injustices? We have the justice system, and within the justice system, we have the law enforcement officers who are responsible for the investigation of a crime and gather evidence to identify and use it against the presumed perpetrator.
Now that we know what the criminal justice system is and who is involved, we can take a look at some stats. As we could see here to the graph on the left, 72% of Black Americans actually believe that white Americans are treated more fairly by the justice system, compared to a 40% of white Americans and a 51% of Hispanic Americans. However, white Americans stand at a 49% at believing that the justice system treats everyone equally. Compared to Black Americans, they're at a low of 17% and Hispanics at a 27%. Now let's look at local police, one of the branches of the criminal justice system. Black Americans stand at a 31% of being highly confident that their local police department will treat all racial groups equally, compared to a 42% of Hispanics. And not surprisingly, 64% of white Americans believe that their local police treat all racial groups equally. In fact, 65% of Black Americans have actually felt targeted because of their race, compared to, really surprisingly, 35% of Latino and Asian adults have actually felt targeted because of their race. As we could see here, this data was taken in 2016. Now in 2022, it has not changed a lot. The percentages have only gone up by 1 or 2%. It's quite shocking considering the changes we've gone through. Now that we know how different races feel about our criminal justice system, we could take a look at stats from different branches of our criminal justice system and how they seem to treat these different races. But first, let's take a look at the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for U.S. residents born in 2001. These residents are around 20 to 21 years of age right now. As we could see, look at the graph, all men stand at a 1 in 9 compared to all women standing at a 1 in 56. White men stand at a 1 in 17. White women stand at a 1 and 111. Black men stand at a 1 and 3. Black women stand at a 1 in 18. Latino men stand at a 1 in 6. And Latina women stand at a 1 in 45. Now let's take a look at our state and their stats. Black Californians are actually more than twice as likely than white Californians to be searched. The search rate stands at a 20.5% and a 8.2%. Surprisingly, the California Highway Patrol stops in 2019 have been more than 60% towards white individuals, compared to a 35% of those stops being towards Black individuals. Now let's take it more locally to Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Police Department actually accounts for almost 31% of those stops being towards Black Californians, compared, and not surprisingly, to 10% of those stops being towards white Californians. This raises many questions as to why the California Highway Patrol, which hands out mostly the speeding tickets, is targeting, could say, white individuals compared to the Los Angeles Police Department, which seems to be targeting Black Californians. However, as we know, the Highway Patrol focuses on like speeding. It raises a question if the Los Angeles Police Department is biased towards Black Californians, and this raises the question as to these injustices are being because of the training or what's going on.
So now we will move on to talk about the impact that this has. Criminal justice injustices leave long-lasting effects. There are so many, but here are just some of the few effects that it has. About 60,500 of the inmates reported experiencing sexual violence. This alone can lead to serious trauma. Another thing is that after being released, it is often harder to live a normal life or go back to the life that they previously had. One of the most difficult things is being able to secure a steady job. And this is because it is basically on every application when it comes to applying for a job. You may see that it asks you if you have been incarcerated, if you have committed any misdemeanor or felony. And so this causes whether or not you get the job. It also, your chances of receiving federal help decrease very much. Another thing is that 10 to 20% of the inmates suffer from serious mental illnesses. Mentally ill inmates are also prone to victimization by other inmates because prisons are not prepared to deal with mentally ill inmates. A lot of the prison systems are not prepared, meaning that they may not have the adequate resources to help the inmates, and just kind of put everybody in like a whole prison system instead of maybe separating those inmates that suffer from mental illnesses than those who do not. So next we will talk about the outcomes of criminal justice injustices. First of all, children suffer as well if parents are involved in the criminal justice system. They may suffer psychological strain. They may express antisocial behavior, which can cause to being in trouble at school. And then going towards maybe adolescence or adulthood, they are more likely to end up being involved in criminal activity. So then also partners of the incarcerated individual also suffer. They can enter a depressive state and end up with financial hardships. And then obviously the inmates themselves suffer psychological effects, especially if someone has been wrongfully incarcerated. This can cause anxiety, depression, anger, cognitive disturbances, and psychosis. Being incarcerated changes your life. It's not the same, so obviously it is going to affect someone mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Solution: have consistent monitoring and screening for police officers. Have gone through tough times in their personal lives, such as divorce, those who have had multiple complaints filed against them, and require them to have regular check-ins. In-prison educational programs. This allows those incarcerated to learn a trade and work towards a degree. For example, CSULA has a prison graduation initiative. Alternatives to incarceration, such as community service and effective rehabilitation programs. Resource page, NAACP.org. This includes ways to get involved, provides information about current legislative issues, and a rundown on your rights. Another resource is the EIJ, or EqualJusticeInitiative.org. They're committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the U.S., challenges racial and economic injustice, and assists advocates and policymakers with criminal justice reform by providing reports, research, and educates them on any current issues in the legislative law.
And this is our reference page.